All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for joining us for this first virtual town hall for the 20th Legislative District. I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping and let everybody know that if you have questions throughout, please enter them in the Q&A section so that we can make sure that we get to them either through the presentation and the discussion or at the end with the Q&A. We are a little bit behind schedule, so we will likely take this to about 8:15 to make sure that we still have enough time to cover all the various topics. Anyways, welcome. If everyone can mute, I'm sorry, thank you so much. And I know if we have a little bit of a technical difficulty going on, but we're going to try to work through this together. Let's get everyone muted so we can start. I'm Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope for this to be one of many virtual town halls that we have so that we can ensure that we are in touch, accountable, and working together to advance the 20th district. And I'm going to just do a couple things to set us up right now. I see we're doing a speaker view. I am going to minimize my gallery. Here we go. And then I am going to just let everybody know, once again, put your questions in the Q&A. I wanted to just kind of give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to do a little bit of introductions, just so that you get a better sense of myself, and I want to also introduce my colleagues. We're going to also go through a strategy that I have developed with respect to stakeholder engagement, and showcase a few folks that are going to help me with that. We're going to do a little bit of a 101 on government. What is the role of a state legislator? How's that different from an alderman? And then we are going to get into a recap of the lame duck session that just happened in Springfield a couple weeks ago. And last, we're going to end with a federal stimulus highlight reel so that you have a sense of what's happening with the stimulus package. And we will attempt to integrate your questions throughout, and we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end for some questions. And hopefully what we are able to share with you this evening, we will be able to cover in our presentation. So a little bit about me. I know that some of you all are already familiar with me, but just to level set, I am a child of Logan Square, a child of two community organizers that met at the Logan Square Boys and Girls Club. For me, growing up in that space really affirmed my identity in terms of understanding that community is family, and that we are accountable to community, and that we are accountable to each other. And having grown up in that particular context really led me to a professional and educational experience that was focused on how to advance our community through education and organizing. And almost 2 decades of professional experience has led me through working in community-based organizations in predominantly Latinx communities such as Little Village, Humboldt Park, and Logan Square. I have spent a lot of time in direct service in the community schools movement, as well as working in Chicago public schools at Roberto Clemente Community Academy, and then entered the policy world through the Latino Policy Forum, and then most recently at Erickson Institute. I've done some volunteer community experience. I used to co-chair the Puerto Rican Agenda of Chicago for the past 6 years. I also served on the board of Logan Square Neighborhood Association, as well as the Illinois State Board of Education. So a lot of my work has always kind of been in this education space, but connecting community and using the positions I've been in to be able to open up avenues for participation and public voice in the policy making process. And so here I am serving as your senator in the 20th district, and really excited to partner with you in this process. And I'd like to introduce at this point, I'm going to ask my colleagues, Representative Jaime Andrade and Representative Will Guzzardi, if you guys can turn on your cameras. And I'm going to actually remove me as a pin, or remove as a spotlight, so that we can all show our faces here. We're going to be sharing some slides, but if you can unmute yourselves, introduce yourself, what district you represent, how long you have been in service, and the committees that you serve on.
Thank you very much. I'm Assistant Majority Leader Jaime Andrade. I'm the state representative for the Illinois 48th District. Right now, we have not assigned committees in the House, but I was formerly the chairman of the Cybersecurity Committee and Human Services. I represent Irving Park neighborhood, half of Logan Square, half of Avondale, Albany Park, and mostly those are the neighborhoods I represent. And my next door neighbor is Representative Will Guzzardi, who is also a caucus whip.
Thank you, Leader Andrade. My name is Will Guzzardi. I'm state rep from the 39th district, which is just south and west of Representative Andrade's district. So that includes the other half of Logan Square, some of Avondale, Belmont-Cragen, and the southern end of Portage Park. I have been the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Committee in the House. And I've also been a member of the Criminal Justice Committee and the Energy Environment Committee. I look forward to sharing information with you all tonight about some of the great work that Senator Pacione-Zayas, Representative Andrade, and I have been working on in Springfield in the last couple of weeks. Thanks, Al.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So as you know, we kind of alluded to, the 39th and the 40th district make up the 20th Senate district. So we obviously have some shared responsibility over this space and some overlap in our particular work. And I'm assigned to the education, higher ed, health and human services, as well as revenue and human rights committees. So I'll be really excited to kind of share that work with you. So what I'm going to do right now is actually take you through the stakeholder engagement strategy that I'm planning to launch. I've been on the job just a little over 30 days. And I take the work seriously in terms of trying to make sure that there's an accountability structure, there is a regular stakeholder engagement and partnership. And I want to kind of walk you through that so that you get a sense of it. And I welcome your feedback. Remember, you can put your questions, your comments in the Q&A. So let's go to the screen share here. All right. Can I get a thumbs up for people who have some video on, or if in the chat you can confirm you can see my screen?
We can see it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Let me go to the slideshow here. All right. Okay, so also just to get the conversation going in the chat, if you can introduce yourself and, you know, speak to what is your connection to the 20th legislative district in the chat. And then, like I said, post your questions in the Q&A section so that we can distinguish the two. So as far as the stakeholder engagement strategy, there's 3 different ways that I am looking to partner with you to do the work of the 20th legislative district. The first is what you're experiencing right now, which is a monthly virtual town hall. This is actually a strategy that I used as an Illinois State Board of Education member to, again, stay in touch with stakeholders all across the state as it related to public education in Illinois. But also to crowdsource questions, to also share information that I'm learning about how a state agency works, but ultimately, you know, to have an accountability mechanism so that I'm in touch and able to truly represent the perspectives, the issues, the concerns, the priorities, the needs of the group that I was going to be representing, which was the entire state. So I want to continue that kind of tradition by holding these virtual town halls. Obviously, we have some technical difficulties, so we're going to have to work this out before the next one. But either way, we're going to get that together, and you can expect this once a month during session. The other piece is I'm going to go through the other two parts, the topical roundtables and the youth council. I'm actually going to take you through that in the next slide here. And so what you see here, the topical roundtables essentially are going to be 5 roundtables that focus on kind of foundational core needs in our community. Each one will cover, one of them will cover health, one of them will cover housing, another focused on education, another one on small businesses and workforce, and violence reduction. The roundtables will be co-chaired by individuals who either live or work in the 20th district and populated by individuals who live and work in the 20th district. And I actually would love right now, I've got some representatives on here with me who have graciously agreed to serve as co-chairs. If you can actually turn on your video and say a quick hello. Let's start with, on the housing side, Ruben Feliciano.
There you go. I'm turning on my video. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ruben Feliciano, and I represent Rincon Family Services. We are an organization in the 20th District, and I will be co-chairing the Housing Committee, and very honored, humbled, and privileged to have been asked and tasked for this important area in our community.
Thank you. Let's ask Cecily Rosario.
Hi, good evening. My name is Cecily Relucio, and I am a resident of Albany Park. I've lived in Chicago for 27 years, worked in public education for 22, and I've been a CPS teacher, education leader from elementary, my daughter, elementary grades through graduate level. I'm a CPS parent of a 7th grader and a senior in high school, and I am co-chairing the Education Roundtable. Honored to be here and privileged to serve.
Thank you, Cecily, and sorry I messed up your last name.
No worries.
Trust and believe, I know the pain of that. I'm actually going to skip small business and workforce at this point because I don't have somebody to represent that. Violence reduction, I have a representative who's going to actually be representing one of the co-chairs. Rick Estrada, if you can show us your video and I can pin you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rick Estrada. I am the president of Metropolitan Family Services here serving the Chicagoland region. My colleague, Vaughn Bryant, will serve as the co-chair of the Violence Reduction Committee. And we're helping the city, county, and state with those efforts across the region. I've lived most of my life either in Logan Square and in Irving Park now. I'm represented by all 3 of our elected officials here this evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Rick. And I'd also like to ask April Rivera to show us your face and introduce yourself because she's going to be co-chairing the violence reduction.
Welcome, good evening. I am excited to be a part of this. I have been in this district pretty much my whole life. And so I'm of the community as well. And I have worked with violence prevention programs and youth center programs, as well as helped support past legislation to support our populations, such as juvenile justice, foster care, as well as domestic violence. And I'm excited that we are bringing a voice and a face to this in the community.
Thank you, April. And unfortunately, our health co-chair is not available. Dr. Aida Giachello Many of you all may be familiar with her work. She is one of our foremost health experts from the Puerto Rican community that has done quite a bit of work in many of the communities that are represented in the 20th district. And she's probably, you may have heard her name because she is at the forefront of advocacy, particularly as it relates around social determinants of health, and more recently around COVID-19 and the adverse impact on the Latinx community. So I'll explain a little bit about the roundtables in a moment, but there is also going to be a youth council. It's really important to me that young people are at the table, that they are leading, that we as adults are following their lead. I feel very deeply about that. Young people have always been at the forefront of social change and movements. And we need to create space and ensure that they have their voice and agency exercised at all times. And so this youth council will be convened by young people representing, I'm looking for a representative from each of the 11 wards in our city, in our district. And I have an adult liaison who is going to support their work. And Stephen Rosado, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Rosado. I am also a lifelong member, mostly lifelong member of this community as well. I currently live in the Avondale, Irving Park area. I'm really excited to be able to support this work. I'm a strong proponent, much like Senator Pacione-Zayas, of bringing in young people into the work and creating space and for them to lead and be part of the process of affecting policy change in our city, in our state, in our country. And I'm really just excited again, to be able to support this work and looking forward to what's to come.
Thank you. Okay, so moving around, I'm gonna just kind of walk us through a little bit about these roundtables so you get a sense. Essentially, all of them I'm charging with contributing to a people's legislative agenda, by defining policy priorities, refining positions on legislation, and co-authoring legislation. I also am looking for support to develop a popular education campaign on government in terms of what it is, what I can expect from it, how can I influence it. I really also see the Youth Council playing a role in helping me to do that, taking over my Instagram account, creating TikTok videos, showing us what is life like through their eyes. And again, telling us how they're experiencing and how we can all be a part of reimagining and transformation. So what I want to also highlight, I've given you some core areas, but I also want each of these tables to design policy recommendations using these lenses. So it's going to be really important that folks who populate it have an understanding that these are sort of the expectations that we're bringing to the table. While we may be looking at housing, we're going to be looking at housing through an anti-racist framework. That is to disrupt anti-Blackness, that is to center people of color, people who have historically been marginalized. We are also wanting to apply a lens around disability and people with disabilities, environmental justice, immigrant and refugee rights, LGBTQ rights, restorative justice and juvenile justice, revenue ideas, because we are in Illinois and we need to create more revenue opportunities. We can have a lot of ideas, but we need to also think about how do we fund those ideas. And then youth and children in care, and I'm open to what is missing. So please feel free to add that in the chat or the comments. Let's move right along. What you'll see is, as I mentioned, there's co-chairs. And there's co-chairs of the roundtables as well as the council members. The expectation is a minimum of 3 meetings, one at the beginning of session, one at close of session, one prior to veto. There may be times where I reach out to ask for some assistance, reading a bill, reflecting on a bill, asking your opinion about strategy, and you can express your interest through contacting us on the website. In the drop-down box on the contact us, you can say which roundtable you'd like to be a part of, and we will be launching them this month. So I wanted to just kind of remind folks what's the difference between an alderman and a state legislator. I do also have the difference between a county commissioner and a congressperson, but I don't want to go into all those details since we are behind. But what you can see here is a distinction between the two roles. A lot of city services obviously fall under the alderperson's role, and of course passing city ordinances and the budget, but you'll see there specifically, and then you'll see what a state legislator is responsible for in terms of passing laws that are substantive around appropriations, which is budget, or capital projects, which we refer to as vertical and horizontal. Vertical in terms of buildings and structures, horizontal in terms of bridges, roads, railways, those types of things. We also support with your navigation with Illinois state agencies. And we also address concerns, questions around school funding, MAP grants, veteran resources, health and human services, all the agencies, veteran affairs, the health and family care services, the Department of Children and Family Services. That's what our role is, to help you navigate those particular services. So I'm going to transition us a little bit into the lame duck session. And the lame duck session happens after a general election. It's some unfinished business that from the last session didn't get taken care of. And it usually is composed of individuals who may not have been reelected, but can still vote on this as they are finishing up the General Assembly, that particular session. And so in the lame duck, we had a marathon session. It lasted about 4 days. We broke several nights. Had not had that feeling since I was an undergrad in college or nursing my children through the night. So it was definitely baptism by fire. But as you all know, there was some significant legislation that was passed around the Black Caucus's 4 pillars. We're going to kind of give you some top lines, some highlights. We won't be able to get into deep details, but it's enough to get the conversation started. And we're going to point you in the direction so that if you do want to look at the bills deeper, if you want to schedule a breakdown, I'd be happy to entertain that, or we can look into questions that you may have. We're going to cover a couple of the other highlights that you'll see bulleted there. And so I'm going to get right into it. And I'm going to specifically call on my colleague, Representative Guzzardi, because he's going to help me with the economic access and opportunity and equity. But I'm going to cover the education piece very quickly. As you know, in terms of the 4 pillars, this emerged out of the outrage and the frustration with the murder of George Floyd and so many other Black folks. And, historically, all of the vestiges of systemic racism. For too long, we have, kind of incrementally gone along and fixed something here and tried to fix something there. The purpose of the 4 pillars was to be transformative, to be deliberate in what we are trying to correct and ultimately reimagine in the spaces of education, economic access and opportunity, as well as criminal justice reform and health. And so what you see here are kind of the highlights in terms of, on the education side, we covered cradle to career. There's some amazing early childhood wins in terms of the expansion of what we call early intervention is for children who parents or providers who have identified that they have some concerns about their development. And it's an incredibly important program. One of my children has benefited from it when we were noticing some delays around speech and around occupational development. So it is life-changing when we are able to capture those types of challenges early on and provide the supports so that children can develop to their optimal level. There is also in this particular bill increases towards early childhood infant mental health services. And I know you're probably wondering, what do children need infant early childhood mental health services? Well, that's a whole nother story that Erickson Institute, my former employer, has done some amazing work on. And when we attend to childhood trauma, when we attend to development issues that do specifically impact a child's mental wellness, it really makes a world of a difference. You'll see there's several task forces that were created as a result of this, as well as an expansion of university scholarships to support underrepresented students and removing barriers to college access and persistence. Like I said, these are top lines. I'd be happy to go deeper into other pieces of it. And I'm going to pass it over to Representative Guzzardi to speak to the economic opportunity and economic access, opportunity, and equity. And you know what? I'm going to also tell myself I need to slow down because we have some translation going on. And I want to make sure that El Saprado is able to pick up all of this. So sorry if I have been speaking too quickly.
Thank you, Senator. I'll take it from here just for a minute to talk about the economic equity provisions in the bill. The Black Caucus wanted to approach the economic issues facing communities of color, as Senator Pacione-Zayas said, from a holistic perspective, to look at the various ways in which financial institutions and the economic structure of our state disenfranchise communities of color. So the legislation that they passed addressed a number of different areas around economic access, around providing that people of color have equal pay for equal work, around raising the diversity goals and inclusion goals for state contracts so that people of color and people of color-led businesses receive state contracts at a greater rate, allowing for state funds to be invested in financial institutions run by people of color in communities of color. A critical component of this that I think is very important to highlight is prohibiting discrimination against people in hiring and in public housing processes for people who have criminal records, people who have justice involvement in their past. And then one more point that I'd like to highlight on the economic equity piece is a piece that I've been working on with some colleagues for many years now around payday lending and title loans. So as you may or may not know, these are short-term loans that are issued to people mostly in communities of color, people who are in dire need of financial assistance to get through the next couple of days, to pay their rent, to pay the bills, to keep the lights on. And these loans are issued at outrageous interest rates, some of them up to 400% annualized interest. And title loans are in many ways worse than payday loans because they're secured by the title to your vehicle. So when people are unable to pay those loans back, it's not only that they are forced into potentially bankruptcy, but they also have their vehicle taken from them, which can obviously hinder their ability to go to work, to care for their children, et cetera. So we passed legislation to bring Illinois in line with 17 other states and cap the interest rate at 36% for all these lending products. Now, I know 36% is still a pretty high interest rate, but compared to the 400% that they've been charging, it's a huge, huge reduction. And because these loans are relatively short term, you don't usually end up accruing the whole 36% over the course of the year. So that's a major advancement in equity so that communities of color, people who are in difficult financial situations have access to capital, access to the money that they need at an interest rate that won't put them into bankruptcy.
Thank you, Representative Guzzardi. Let's move along to the criminal justice reform highlights. And actually, Representative Guzzardi and I are going to take these on together because there were some really great pieces of it. We understand that, there's been a lot of information and perhaps confusion about the purpose of this particular bill. And I think what, I want to just address from the outset, there has been some discussion about how this bill was over 700 pages and how it was presented in the middle of the night and pushed through. And what I really want people to understand is that there were 9 public hearings over the period of the fall. And then there were about 30 plus hours of testimony, as well as many one-on-one meetings with stakeholders to help shape this bill. And so and throughout that process, members of the General Assembly had been involved in the hearings and had been able to hear all the testimony and review it and see the multiple iterations of the bill. Now, when you have a bill that big, 700 plus pages, it's not that it's all brand new text. And when you're looking at a bill, and I'm going to actually ask Ken Lowe to drop the link in the chat so that folks can get a sense of what that bill looks like. What helps is when you see language struck or language underlined, and that's the new language that or the any type of modifications that have been made to the language. So it kind of helps you go right to where the changes have been. But what you can see in terms of this infographic here is that there has been, you know, various things that have happened or that have been passed through this particular iteration. And I want everyone to understand too, is that the actual effective date is not until July 1, and some of the provisions in here have longer kind of runways for some of these provisions to ramp up. So there will be time to hear feedback. There will likely be what we call a trailer bill or a cleanup bill when you have like an omnibus bill like this that has so many different pieces to it. So that we can allow for feedback. And, you know, I encourage you to reach out if you have specific concerns so that we can help you understand, because as Representative Guzzardi said, this is supposed to be transformational. This is supposed to be holistic. This is really supposed to create opportunity for us to address long-standing systemic issues and foster better relationships between community and law enforcement, and to remove some of the systemic barriers that have historically hindered people of color, specifically Black folks, and also people with limited economic resources. So I'm going to stop right there and ask Representative Guzzardi to kind of speak to a couple points to help flesh it out a little further.
Thank you, Senator Pacione-Zayas. So you see a lot of bullet points here about what the legislation does. As you can see, a lot of it is focused on policing, training for law enforcement, strategies and tactics, you know, banning the chokeholds, making sure they have body cameras on, changing the way that they respond in protests and crowd control situations. But I want to just take 1 minute and talk about the cash bail provisions, because I've heard from a couple of people, I think this has been the subject of a lot of attention. And I've heard from a couple of people in my inbox over the last few days, well, you know, if we get rid of cash bail, it's just going to mean that the dangerous people are just running around loose on our streets. And I want to just reframe how this works for just a minute. Because right now, the way our system works, when somebody gets arrested and charged with a crime, we don't evaluate them based on how dangerous they are, right? We don't make a decision about whether they should stay in jail before their trial or go home to their community before their trial. We don't make that decision based on risk or danger. We make that decision based on money. So you look at, for instance, someone brought up this example today of Kyle Rittenhouse, right? The young man who went up to the protests in Kenosha with an AK-47 and shot people dead in the street, right? That guy was able to get $2 million bond posted, and now he's walking around flashing white supremacy signs and drinking beers like nothing happened. So it's not that he's on the streets because he's less dangerous. He's on the streets because he had more money. And meanwhile, people who are committing low-level offenses, non-violent offenses, property offenses, drug offenses, are being held in jail before their trial because they can't post $500 for bond. So right now we have a system that takes people's freedom away, not based on if they're a danger to the community, but based on whether they can pay. And the system that we're creating with this bill is based on risk. So there will be a scientifically designed risk assessment tool that will look at the person who's been arrested and say, can this person safely return to their community until their trial, or are they a genuine risk to somebody in their community, and do they need to be held? So we believe that this is not only going to be more fair, but it's also going to be more safe. It's going to keep our community safer by making sure that people who are genuinely a danger can't just get a bunch of money together and get back on the streets. So we think this is both a fairness issue and a safety issue. And together, I really believe that this is going to be a transformational and positive response.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I know that there has been some kind of framing around this is about defunding the police. And I know that that may have a connection to the provision for body cameras. And it actually, This is not about a defund the police type bill. This is really about making sure that the state comes up to par with having body cameras. I mean, we have them in Chicago, but across the state that provision is not set. And what this does is put a date of 2025 and incentivizes municipalities to be able to get access or prioritization to grants to be able to fund and pay for body cameras. It also speaks to the mental health and wellness needs of law enforcement and the creating opportunities and better access to mental health, as well as training around trauma. And then there is a pilot in here with respect to having kind of a co-first responder model, and where you have a paramedic or a mental health crisis practitioner or a fireman come through and support a particular call. So there's many things in here. There's a lot more to talk about it, but this again is the beginning of a conversation. I encourage you to reach out if you have questions and concerns about specific points. And, to my point about the bill, please, if you are interested in having conversations with the sponsor, I can help facilitate that. And also, if there's going to be additional public hearings, of course, keep you in the loop. But I think, what's going to be really important is you identify what those specific concerns are. So you can come with, in this part of the bill, I have a concern, and here is my proposed solution for consideration, and here's the evidence that I have. So it's going to really help if you're able to articulate that by referencing a specific point in the bill. Okay, so moving along, I want to draw your attention to the health. So the health pillar, we've got some work to do there because the health pillar it passed both chambers in different kind of formats, and we weren't able to have concurrence, meaning like the same exact versions passed in each chamber. So that's why it didn't actually pass in the 101st General Assembly. But we are going to be working on that in the spring. But I do have this great news that our neighboring Senator Aquino, had carried this particular bill. And it's really about transforming healthcare and hospitals by really bringing together multiple partnerships to reimagine the way that we address social determinants of health. And there's $60 million that's going to be appropriated in terms of state funding that was previously set aside, but it's going to unlock $90 million in federal funds. So we're going to really have an opportunity to target in our communities and address holistically the healthcare and hospital needs. The other bills I wanted to kind of draw to your attention has to do with labor protections. The first one is with the Chicago firefighters' pension and bringing them closer to parity with their counterparts outside of Chicago and affording greater access. Currently, firefighters within Chicago only had a 1.5% COLA, cost of living adjustment, on their pension, compared to a 3% compounded outside of Chicago. And so what this bill did was bring that up to a 3% simple. We historically had just to give you some of the technicalities, we used to bring more and more firemen into that higher pay through a technicality every few years. Now, this will have some implications on the city budget. It will mean that there will be a greater amount that is unfunded. And that's why particularly I'm going to need your help in identifying opportunities to generate revenue so that the pension fund does not go bankrupt. But this was really an issue about parity and transparency in that. The second provision was really extending the COVID-19 workers' compensation measures for our first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, so that if they did actually get COVID as a result of being a first responder, they would actually be able to claim that in workers' comp. And of course, in the most unfortunate situations receive death, their survivors receiving death benefits. The last piece I'm going to have Representative Guzzardi explain, because he's been working on this since the beginning of his tenure in the General Assembly.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is a piece of legislation designed to bring Chicago teachers back on par with the rest of the state of Illinois. Years ago, the legislature passed a provision that would limit the ability of Chicago teachers to collectively bargain over almost any issue. It would reduce their ability to bargain only to issues of salary and benefits. And as you see on the slide here, staffing, class size, length of the school day, those issues were all prohibited subjects of bargaining. I think the idea originally when this was passed was to try to stave off potential strikes from the union. But what it did ultimately was actually make things more contentious, as we've seen obviously in the last 5 or 10 years, made things more contentious between the union and the city rather than less. Because as those issues were prohibited subjects of bargaining, the union was sort of pressed into conflict around the fewer subjects that they had available to them to negotiate. So the effort to deprive Chicago teachers of their right to collectively bargain didn't benefit anybody. It didn't help teachers, it certainly didn't help students, and it didn't help the district. So we're restoring those collective bargaining rights to Chicago teachers so that they can bargain over things like, for instance, in this exact moment, as they're negotiating with Chicago Public Schools, we want them to be able to negotiate over conditions for our students and to our teachers when a return to school should happen. I believe that our teachers are taking on a very noble and important fight right now, but they're doing it with one hand tied behind their back because of this law. So we passed a change here, which the governor is expected to sign in the coming days, which will empower the union to bargain for subjects beyond just their own pay, right? To bargain for the conditions for students in the classroom and for the maintenance of buildings and all these other issues that every other teacher in Illinois currently has the right to bargain over. So we think this is a really important step forward. It'll protect teachers and students during COVID and beyond.
Thank you. And just the last segment or section of this segment, and then we'll give you some federal stimulus updates. Want to ask Representative Andrade if he can, just in a couple minutes, remind us of the amazing wins that they were able to negotiate during the spring session with respect to Medicaid expansion and welcoming centers.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry about that. I was just, I put our thing through my Facebook Live so people can, and then on the face, if they see, they can now log on to the Zoom account. So I do want to just recap a couple of things that we have. You know, we had the Medicaid expansion for the seniors and undocumented. Also, we now created the RISE Act for through MAP grants that now eligible students, if they're student, they can also now expand and get funding, which they weren't able to before for education. We also passed, for welcoming centers to help expand the welcoming centers. And one of the other things that we did is we passed the census funding to make sure that everyone was counted on. There's a few other things, but due to time and the delay, I want to just mention those, one of some of the big wins we had, and then just go back to you, Senator, for time constraints.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so last part, federal stimulus. Woo! We got a lot to cover here, but we're going to do it quickly. I think we only got about three slides on this one. But I know everybody is really interested in this. So I'm going to actually ask Representative Guzzardi if you can come back and speak to the unemployment benefits.
Yeah, so there are, in the federal stimulus package, there was an expansion of, or sorry, I should say an extension of the unemployment benefits that were made available to Illinoisans during the previous CARES Act. So this $300 a week pandemic unemployment compensation, it can be extended until March 13th. There was a brief window in between when the previous bill expired and the new one took place. So people who are on unemployment may have had a brief disruption of their benefits in there, but those benefits are back in effect and will be that increase in benefits of an additional $300. There is also provisions for people who work as independent contractors. It depends a little bit on your income streams, sort of how much money you get from salary work versus independent contractor work. But I know there are many people who are working in the gig economy, you know, driving for Uber or Lyft or Postmates or Grubhub, or who are actual independent contractors for whom this is an important issue. There's also an additional 24 weeks of unemployment benefits made available as a result of this stimulus as well. Now, eligibility for these is complicated. Navigating these systems has proven challenging for many of our constituents. We've had a lot of calls and emails about this issue. But I would very much encourage you, if you believe you're eligible for unemployment benefits, if you're not sure if you're eligible, if you're having trouble navigating the system, please contact our office, contact Senator Pacione-Zayas' office. We will put our contact information at the end here. We'll have a slide with all of it. Please reach out to us. We would be very eager to help you try to navigate the systems. We know they're complicated, but the good news is there are benefits available for people who are out of work. So let us help you get those benefits.
Great. Actually, you're still on with the housing.
Oh, my fault, sorry. Yeah, so let's talk about housing. So the one big part of the relief package that Congress passed in December was additional emergency rental assistance. So there are many billions of dollars going out to the states to support renters. We've already had one round of emergency rental assistance in which hundreds of millions of dollars went out across the state of Illinois during the summer and fall. So the Illinois Housing Development Authority is going to be dispensing a second round of this assistance. The application process is still being figured out. But again, if you are in need of rental assistance, please make sure you subscribe to our newsletters and follow us on social media. We're going to put out all the details about how to apply for these programs when the time comes. But the way this assistance works, you know, it goes directly to your landlord. So for those small landlords, mom and pop landlords out there who are concerned, who are struggling because their tenants can't make those rental payments, this is relief that's going to go directly to you. So we think that that's a really important feature of keeping our communities whole during these challenging times. And then President Biden has also issued an executive order providing for a moratorium on evictions. This is an issue that we're hoping to legislate on in the spring session, but we're really grateful to the president for making sure that people can stay in their homes. You know, evictions are very disruptive under normal circumstances, but especially under COVID. You know, we know that families who are evicted often move in with their uncles or aunts or cousins or you know, relatives, friends, and that sort of combining of households just leads to much more risk of community spread of COVID, right? When people are living together in close quarters, and maybe some of them are essential workers going out into the world every day, that's where we've seen a lot of cases, especially in our Latino communities. We've seen that household spread has been really, really sort of a challenging problem to solve. So we want people to stay in their homes. As my colleague, Representative Ramirez, Leader Ramirez says all the time, you can't stay at home if you don't have a home. So we want people to stay in their homes, stay at home, and stay safe during the duration of the pandemic.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna just quickly go through the last part here. So there's a few more pieces to cover that I'm sure you've heard about. And I mean, these are just kind of like top lines. But the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, that is for employers to be able to make up for lost revenue as a result of COVID. It's through an application process. This is the second round. The last time, you know, per usual in most of these situations, the money ran out. And, you know, a lot of the small businesses really, you know, struggle to access those funds. And so there's going to be a second round with some specific provisions to ensure that smaller businesses that aren't as established, are able to come to the front of the line and access these particular funds. Childcare. As you all know, I'm an early childhood advocate. We do not have anything functioning in our society economy without childcare. And so this is an enabling, necessary provision in our society. And therefore there is going to be some significant funds coming towards Illinois to be able to maintain and sustain the childcare sector. And so education, as you see, there were grants that went from the feds to the Illinois State Board of Education to then local school districts to be able to pay for all the different types of setup that we have as a result of COVID, and, you know, provisions for PPE and digital devices, as well as connectivity, professional development and learning for educators. And so we're getting ready to receive up to $2 billion in Illinois. And then we have what some people refer to as stimulus checks, and I've heard others refer to them as survival checks. And so currently, you know, in the stimulus that passed back in December, it was $600 per individual. The new proposal that is currently being considered is to actually add $1,400 to that. And now, as a result of what passed in December, you can have mixed status families are now eligible to not only get the 600 or the potentially the 2,000 per individual, but they can also reclaim the survival checks from the last round that were I think they were 1,200 per individual, and then there was an amount for dependents. So these are great wins. We're going to be sharing more information as we get it, you know, so please stay in touch. And, you know, our Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, he is our point of contact with, you know, keeping us abreast of how that's moving. And hopefully we can partner with him to have a more comprehensive breakdown of what's in store with the federal stimulus. So that concludes the presentation piece. I wanted to make sure you all had our contact information. As you can see, we've moved. The 20th District office has moved to 3140 West Montrose. You are right now, because of the pandemic, we are not open to the public, but you can still reach out via phone as well as the website, the contact us form. We are constantly monitoring it. And then you will see here Representative Andrade and Representative Guzzardi's contact information. You know, what has been mentioned, if you need assistance with navigation and state agencies, if there's been any fraud, particularly with the unemployment, employment security benefits, please make sure to reach out for help. Whether you have questions, whether you have concerns, whether you have suggestions, all of that, we want to make sure that you have the contact information and are able to stay in touch with us. There was a question in the chat, and I want to make sure that I do address it. So it says, can you explain more about the Medicaid expansion? I personally do not have the details. That was pre my tenure. I'm not sure if my colleagues have any direction in terms of what we can do to help. It seems Esther was asking this question.
Yeah, I can speak to it briefly. So yeah, Illinois became last year, as Leader Andrade pointed out, Illinois became the first state in the country to extend Medicaid coverage to undocumented people. It will be for people who are 65 and older. If you or someone in your family is interested in signing up for Medicaid coverage and is undocumented, again, please contact our offices. We'd be happy to help you navigate the system and make sure that you get the coverage that you're entitled to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just checking to see if folks have any more questions in the chat. I don't see anything. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to respond to them. If not, you know how to get in touch with us. As we've mentioned before, it's through our websites, it's through our phones, and we will be hosting another one of these virtual town halls likely on the last Tuesday of the month in February. And I promise we're going to get our act together on the technology side so that we can make sure that we are as smooth as possible. And, any suggestions that you have, ideas and all of that. Thanks again for all your patience and for sticking around 16 minutes after we said we were going to end. So with that, I appreciate all of the time that you've dedicated, and please stay safe. And hopefully the snow didn't do you in too much this round. Thank you.